What's going on, everybody? Mortem here, this time bringing you my first impressions for Space Marine 2, which recently launched into its early access period a few days ahead of its full launch on September 9th. I jumped into that to take a look at it, no review key here, mostly just because I thought the game looked really cool and I wanted to play it for myself. Now, after playing it for a little while, I have gone ahead and decided that I'm going to review this one, even if it's a little outside of my normal wheelhouse, because I'm having such a good time with it. With that exact thing in mind, I've already finished the main campaign. It's only about 10 hours, so that was effectively a single day event for somebody who does this full time. And I'm now into the co-op and multiplayer stuff. So with that out of the way, let's actually talk about what this game is. So as I'm sure you're aware, third-person shooter, set of course in the Warhammer 40k universe. This game is big, bombastic, and egregious like you would expect playing a Space Marine to be. So first up, let's talk the single-player campaign side of things. Now right away, I don't want to spoil anything, obviously we're still ahead of the official release here, but basically we take up the role of Titus, the main character from the first game, as he is reinstated into the Ultramarines chapter of Space Marines, following a service of penance in the Death Watch. As this is happening, a world is being attacked by Tyranid swarms, and we are going to set out across a few different missions to take that out, which mostly involves absolutely annihilating alien threats to the world. Overall, I will say I've really enjoyed the story, the entire thing. It's very compelling. I think there are moments where it can get a little tiresome, but the game quickly moves on at that point, so it doesn't really overstay its welcome or anything, but especially the last few missions, I was having a blast. I thought the story was really cool. Now, in the single-player campaign, you just play as Titus. However, once you get done with that and you start moving to the PvE and PvP multiplayer modes, you get to make your own Space Marine, kind of. You get to pick one of 6 classes that you can freely swap between, but each of them has their own separate progression and looks and appearances that you can customize and everything. So first up, operations. It's my understanding that while these are PvE, you are supposed to be able to do these solo, with the game just filling in some bots for you. However, at least during this early access period, that does not seem to be possible, and you have to do that in multiplayer. But these operations, what I thought was really cool about them is that rather than just be generic missions, they are specific goals that take place alongside the main campaign where other squads of Space Marines are sent to go do something. So narratively, I really enjoy that framing. And then the other multiplayer mode is the PvP mode called Eternal War that I haven't really messed around with at all yet, but I'll get to it, which is why this is a first impressions video, frankly. But progression-wise, most of that is saved for operations and the Eternal War mode, where you're progressing with every completed mission and whatnot. The class you are currently playing, which levels up and gets perks and stuff, but also the weapons you're using at the same time, which can level up and get more bonuses and stuff to make you a more effective killing machine. So there is progression in those modes. Now, in the single-player campaign, not really so much. You get access to new and different weapons, which will acquaint you with how they all work before you hit the multiplayer modes, which is probably recommended, but that's the bulk of it. From there, though, let's talk about combat itself. Now, that takes a little bit of getting used to, at least it did for me, but obviously it's action-packed and everything. However, the part that took some getting used to is the armor system. So you have like 3 points of armor. Little enemies will just chip away at individual points, but big attacks from bigger enemies will take out whole chunks of it. Now, as you aggressively attack enemies, you'll have options to mark them for gunshots or execute them. Doing those moves and things like that restores armor. So you'll be losing armor, but can potentially gain it back if you're being particularly aggressive. And once you kind of figure out how that mechanic works, combat gets a lot easier. And then there's the actual weapon side of things. Was really happy to mess around with the selection here. You got your standard bolters, your heavy bolters, your flamer even, your plasma pistols, plasma rifles, your melta weapons, basically everything you'd want to mess around with as a Space Marine is here. And there's even a few heavy weapons in a few places that you can just pick up and use temporarily. But surprisingly, what I've wound up enjoying the most is actually the melee weapons. There's a few different versions of those, your chain sword, your power sword, your combat knife, and your grav hammer. And they all feel appropriately impactful as well. So that's fun on its own, but once you get the missions and stuff where you can use the jump jets, where you can jump up and then charge a melee attack before you slam back down, feels awesome. And I would say that particular concept right there is really what this game seems to do better than basically everything. Everything in this game feels incredible, from actually moving to the combat itself feeling visceral. as you chop apart Tyranids. But two things of note before I wrap up this first impressions video. So, outside of just murdering everything, you can pick up data slates which will give you some background on some of the events that took place alongside whatever the mission you had going on was. But that's pretty much it. So if you don't enjoy this combat and everything and the progression associated with that, you're just really not going to like everything else to do with this, because that really is kind of all this game is. Now, to that end, obviously this doesn't apply to multiplayer, but you'll often be running around with a squad. You won't be alone. And at least the AI bot versions of those are just not capable of being very helpful. There were multiple times where they were just kind of standing around and it was hard to get them to do what I needed them to do, and you don't really have any way of pointing them towards objectives or anything you need them to do, basically. So I think they could definitely stand to clear that up, which is definitely my main gripe. But that's pretty much everything to know first impressions wise. There's obviously more I have to check out with things like the PvP mode and whatnot, and I kind of want to see how the progression of each of the different classes feels as you move into the PvE operation stuff, and then just a couple of other things. So hopefully this won't take too long. Some of the achievements do look a little bit grindy, but mostly pretty easy, so we will see. So broad first impressions for this game, it feels really, really great. If you ever wanted to be like a Space Marine in Warhammer 40k tearing things apart, this game absolutely nails that part of it. But before I leave you, I do want to mention here at the end, some people have been experiencing some technical problems, which is almost certainly to do with at least some of the multiplayer, to be sure. But I have seen some other complaints around crashing and CPU usage and infinite loading screens. So that's something to keep in mind. We'll see how that progresses, a little too early to say. But otherwise, the game has been a blast so far, and I'm looking forward to fully reviewing this one, if only to do something a little bit different. But that is where I'm going to wrap up this particular video, so I hope you enjoyed it, found it informative, all that YouTube jazz, but regardless of any of that, truly, thank you so much for watching. I really do appreciate it. May you wander in wisdom and have an amazing day.